we have a long list of topics to get through, in part because we didn't get to do our topics last week. So we want to play a little bit of catch up, which means that this episode will be a little bit longer. So for those of us who actually like hearing us speak, enjoy. For those of you who wish that we would say less, well, you're in the wrong place. So let's start with, I think, the biggest news of the last week, or the last 2 weeks before the debate, which was the ruling in the Breonna Taylor case. I don't know that there are any words that can truly grasp the feeling of hearing that news.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's most important for me, especially as an educator, again, everything comes back to teaching and how to best be a better teacher, right? Is how did you convey that situation to your students? This is the area where I default to you. Where how did you explain what happened and what it means to them?
Someone's knocking on my door, and they need to understand that I'm recording. So if there's knocking,
I mean, if you got to answer it, you can just set your cam off real quick.
No, it's all good. I'm not on duty. I can't, I can't be everywhere at all times. So
Noted.
So there's no secret that I'm a sociologist of law and punishment, right? Which has come to the fore in the last, since the summer, right? Since I launched We Can't Breathe, the course, the podcast, and all that other stuff. And that like as a part of my academic trajectory, that if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I would be doing this now and so enmeshed in it, I would have been like, yeah, no, not a chance. Like it's not an interest of mine. And I think that I'm not teaching undergrads in the fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm dealing with really young people who are bright and super intelligent, but don't have like a scholarly grasp on these issues, and are super, super raw and super, super tender, and are coming into this in the midst of a reckoning around our own like Black App page. And so folks were pissed. These kids were so angry and so incensed, and they were totally flabbergasted. And part of it is, I think that they, in American culture, justice comes by way of the criminal justice system, right? Like that is our conception of justice. Justice is the law, and the law is justice. And so to see, one of my kids said something to the effect of like, "Teacher Reece, like, I almost wish there had been no indictment." I had to explain to them like what a grand jury actually does, which made them more pissed. For those of you who don't know, grand juries determine probable cause for a crime. So that there was no determination of guilt or innocence. They're basically saying there's no crime here, which is such a low standard that it makes it a low blow, I think. And so I had kids who were feeling like, I almost wish that there had been no indictment for anybody, for anything, because to have the apartment next door get more recognition than Breonna Taylor was insulting. Was absolutely insulting. And I think that if you were plugged into any social media network whatsoever, like that was the recurring motif. Like the apartment next door got more justice than she did. And like helping students understand like how we got to that, right? Having them recognize that grand jury, like what grand juries actually do, having them understand that like we actually, I think there's this notion of like Americans are really litigious. That's not true. Like, and in fact, if we wanted to radically change our court system, everybody would take their cases to trial. We do a lot of pleading out here, right? And that DA, right? Like we're still talking about Breonna Taylor because it's coming to light that he didn't bring any manslaughter or murder charges. And like as disappointing as that is, this is also an individual that has to work within the strictures of Kentucky law, and he's an AD, right? Like good or bad, however we might feel about it, he's there to protect his legal KD. right? He's there to keep his job.
Mm-hmm.
He's there to keep his job. And it's not a justification. I want to be very clear. That's not a justification. But I think that I say all of that to elucidate that, like, I think what I've been trying to impart on my kids is that we need a broader conception of justice. We're not going to win anything for Breonna in the court of law. We're not, right? Like that's closed unless something new emerges on the heels of like the recordings being released. And I haven't seen anything that I have found explosive or interesting or catalytic of a different move.
Mm-hmm.
I think we need to ask ourselves, what are the realms outside of the law that become the potting soil for cementing a lasting radical change that doesn't give us another Breonna Taylor. But even that, like, I think we want recompense, right? We want to have our day in the court. And we didn't get that. And so a young woman who was in her own home, who had been sleeping, who didn't fire a single bullet, who didn't break a single law, who had been working as a fucking frontline worker, gets riddled with bullets and gets nothing. Right? I mean, her family got $12 million,
Mm-hmm.
Which certainly isn't nothing. But as far as the law is concerned, the people who killed her committed no crime.
Right. And I think this is a question that we keep returning to, that you're alluding to here. Because a lot of people, from the arguments that you see coming out of social media and people that I've heard speak will say, oh, well, her family got paid. You're going to say that's not justice, right? That just because these officers weren't held accountable by the rule of the law and weren't charged, tried, and found guilty, that the payment in and of itself is recompense for the crime that was committed against Breonna Taylor in her life, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we've brushed on this topic of like, what does justice look like in a different conversation, but it seems more and more like we really don't have a firm understanding of what justice can look like. And when you mentioned the thing about protecting your legal KD, I'm instantly reminded of Immigration Nation, the docuseries on Netflix, where the judges are explaining that they couldn't actually do their job morally because they would be held accountable and therefore lose their position, which would affect their ability to serve on other benches.
Mm-hmm.
And so it became like this weird sort of ass backwards game of chess where it was like, I need to make strategic decisions that I don't necessarily morally agree with in order to protect my livelihood.
Right.
Which certainly does not sound like justice to me.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking for justice outside of the law, because it seems like by and large in every situation that we could possibly imagine it being involved, the law isn't ever going to actually be helpful. This coming from the child of two lawyers. Right? I don't necessarily agree with the legal system in any meaningful capacity. Mm-hmm. How does it work? Because like a hashtag doesn't cut it. $12 million is nice, but it's not it's not generational wealth unless the family manages to figure out how to reinvest it in a way that it's going to grow tenfold. Mm-hmm. I don't know. The protest leaves a lasting impression, but may not necessarily be justice because there's still violence and acrimony that follows those demonstrations. So I don't know what to tell someone who would be, for example, one of our students or somebody who's saying to me, listen, I feel this type of way about the situation, and I heard what happened with the court case, and I don't feel good about it. Is there anything I can do to make the situation better?
And the reality is, Herbie, that like I have those same kids in my classes, and I have next to nothing to say because we can't get her back, right? I know that no one's like arguing that we can't get her back. But I think this is like if like Chadwick passing was like salt in wounds, this was like dirty hands picking at scabs. Like it just, I think I'm in a place politically where, not that I feel defeated, it takes a lot for me to feel like I'm not winning, or that the things that we're doing aren't helping us win. But at least as it's been presented in Kentucky, it just feels like, oh, we got to take this shit on the chin. And I don't know. I really don't know. I'm at a loss, and I think part of it is like exhaustion of teaching and doing this work over the summer. And I know that that's like clouding my imagination and my capacity to like envision otherwise. But I feel stuck with the Breonna Taylor case, man. I feel really stuck. And I mean, there are some obvious solutions. I think like there needs to be community oversight when it comes to police. And when I say that to folks I know in law enforcement, they're like, Reece, what do you know about fucking law enforcement? Nothing. But like, we pay your salaries. Like the idea that police departments are only accountable to themselves, and that they're only overseen by themselves, just breeds these kinds of issues. The qualified immunity that officers get needs to be reevaluated. It becomes impossible to take a cop to court. And the rhetoric around policing, I think there are lots of things, like the grounds that we need to fight on are call for long game strategies, right? Like the culture of warrior policing, that turns these cops into these like ghetto gunslingers, because that's the culture that's inculcated in their precincts and their departments. That shit gets people killed. How citizens outside of the realm of policing challenge that, I don't know. I don't know what kind of insistent pressure we can apply, given that these are organizations that have consistently shown themselves to be fucking recalcitrant and unwilling to change, to acquiesce. It's like the old boys club, but with guns and paid by taxpayers. And I'm not about to sit here and say not all cops. Like I don't think that cops need protecting. We venerate police officers constantly in American society. They're like the heroes of our fucking culture. But the culture around policing, and the ways in which our precincts are held to account, need to change. And maybe those are the long game solutions that we need to fight for, that they don't bring Breonna back, but maybe prevent another Breonna from emerging.
I think that speaks to what, I don't know if you saw on Saturday, but Saturday Night Live came back this weekend, and the first the first episode, the celebrity guest was Chris Rock, and
I saw his monologue,
and the musical guest was Megan Thee Stallion, and her performance was, the backdrop the entire time said protect black women. The entire time for both songs, that was prominently displayed, right? And after her second performance, she took time to include a monologue that featured, the gunshots, and to explain that there was a need, to make like a social call, that there was a need to protect black women, black men, and their livelihoods. And it's a powerful statement, one that I think needs to be made, especially to a wider audience, like those who watch SNL. And it certainly was very apropos of the fact that, she was recently in the news because she had this whole scuttlebuff with Tory Lanez, who ended up pretty much doing the most sort of like ass backwards music promo the world has ever seen. For those of you who may not have kept up with it, but essentially this genius decided to release his album the day after the Breonna Taylor ruling, because he claims, it's his mother's birthday, which it probably is. I don't know. I don't keep up with his life. right? But having been in the news for shooting Megan Thee Stallion, according to her testimony, right? And then coming after Kalani and JoJo on his record, who both dropped him subsequently from the deluxe versions of their albums, right? So basically stirring a bunch of bullshit with female artists, 2 black women in particular. This fly is dead. On my Cobra Kai shit.
Yeah, that ass.
Yeah. Right, that he starts this bullshit, and so, you know, the dialogue opened up in that moment to a wider audience. And it always reminds me of that sort of debate of, like, who should stay in their lane when, right? Like, a lot of people will come out and say, and I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure it exists somewhere out there. The commentary, I'm sure, after Saturday was like, I don't want to mix my comedy with political commentary about black people, right? Despite the fact that everything about a show like SNL is political commentary.
Right.
And so, I wonder how good of a job those instances do to help us sort of further the plot. Or do they infringe on the ability for people to understand that we need to engage in institutional change, such as, you know, community oversight, like you mentioned, right? Like, do we need the likes of Chris Rock and Megan Thee Stallion to, like, be able to also say that same statement? Like, by the way, don't just protect them by, like, your sentiment of, like, oh, I want to protect black folk, but also, like, to be the ones who are like, by the way, that means do this thing, right? Because their voices are the loudest, but they may not also be the ones positioned to have the knowledge to say that stuff, to convey what that looks like.
I mean, I feel like part of the question that you're posing is like, I mean, and I think that, and this is the question that we've been posing this whole night so far, is like the how of this, right? The like method of how we challenge this, you know. And I was having this conversation actually last night during my actual office hours.
Yes.
Where, you know, it was like a writing lab, and I just had a bunch of kids like crushing papers, and then we started kikiing about this. And I think that, do I think that celebrities, like, using their prominence and platforms to raise consciousness is important? Like, yeah, for sure. You know, like, that kid who's really hype on LeBron might totally reevaluate their politics because LeBron really cares about BLM and black issues, and they might be pulled to do more research and to do more reading and to donate or to protest or develop, whatever. Fine, maybe. At the same time, right, like, I think it's so easy to get caught up in, like, especially when I think about like hip hop as a culture and a genre that, like, thrives on drama in a way that, like, the alt scenes that we also participate in, like, don't really, you know, like, there's always like a little bit of tea here and there, but, like, that's not really what drives the scene. My fear is that on the heels of this failed indictment or bullshit indictment, Tory Lanez drops Daystar, which, outside of the politics and the bullshit, is actually a bad record. I don't know if you got a chance to listen to it.
I haven't.
He just hasn't changed his flow up.
I haven't.
You
I
know
listened to the JoJo record instead, and that shit was tight.
Whose record?
JoJo's.
Right? It was good.
Yeah.
It's
and Kalani's album is also fire.
Yes. But, you know, and I'm a Tory Lanez fan, right? I have liked his music. Daystar just falls flat for me. And it's compounded. It's not because of the Megan Thee Stallion stuff. It's compounded by the fact that now he's doing this bullshit, and being an apologist here. My fear, I say that to say that, like, my fear is that Tory Lanez then becomes, like, the straw man of the issues, right? So it becomes easier for us to say, well, I'm canceling Tory Lanez. And I think we've said this before, like, Tory Lanez does not give a fuck about being, like, you can't cancel Tory Lanez. Tory Lanez is so patently unaware of what I think about him or his music that my singular decision to cancel him, like, doesn't really matter. You know, like the whole, like, oh, Kanye's canceled. Good luck. Kanye's unfucking cancelable. Like, and part of it is because Kanye is not moved by the whims of other people. Kanye's a mad scientist. You think Kanye gives a fuck about us? He does not. He does not, and that's part and parcel of his genius and his like narcissism. And so my fear is that in canceling Tory Lanez, we pin merit badges on our chests. We say that the record was whack. We say that Tory Lanez is trash. We say that he's a fuckboy and that he's day room and whatever it is. And we think, yeah, we've protected black women. And now Breonna's name is not in anybody's mouth.
Right.
Now nobody's keeping up with with the recordings that came out of the grand jury decision. Now nobody's keeping up with the fact that a grand juror is like, yo, bro, no. Your depiction of what went down in that jury is bullshit. So it's not over. But it feels like some segment, like now that there's no tea, now that there's no hype, and part of it could be just feeling defeated. Part of it could be just like a place of self-care. But I think so many of us have moved on because there are no longer like social justice warrior merit badges that we can find and pin onto our chest. And so we stop caring. And so those longer, deeper fights, that trench warfare that is so central to anti-racism, like all of a sudden you're looking around and like, damn, the room is looking real slim. Where was everybody who brought that black square energy back in the summer? All the motherfuckers is gone.
Yep. And you know what?
So I hope that we don't sit here on Tory Lanez and pretend that somehow gives us justice for Breonna. It don't.
And I think the other thing that's interesting too, right, is, and I noticed that I did this myself, and I immediately felt bad about it when I was initially sort of like promoting the episode last week. I had mentioned his name and not Megan's, and I was like, that was a fuck up. I'm a digital media scholar. I know better than to do that, because that's how information gets buried, right? And I think that's another one of the big reasons that, you know, like the same stuff with, you know, cancel culture and saying like, if we cancel him, then we've done our job and we're good, right? Just by talking about it and putting him in the driver's seat of the conversation buries the lead so deep that everybody loses steam and they're like, well, what are we talking about anyway? Like, we did our job already. And so, like, what was the original thread? I don't really know. Right. So why are we talking about it? Like, it feels like the issue always somehow manages to get compounded by something that should be helping to galvanize the conversation, but then becomes the focal point. And once people feel like, you know, they're vindicated by doing what they needed to do for that part of the conversation, then they opt out, right? Like you said, the black square energy it leaves the room and they're done. And it feels shitty. And I'm hopscotching from topic to topic. And I feel like when this episode is done, I'm just going to upload the whole shit because, like, I don't want to cut it. It's going to be too hard to do. All these topics have to do with each other. But this whole same issue of burying the lead happened with the GOP COVID shit. Because we were gaming. It was like 1 a.m, or I was gaming with the homies. I think you might have been working. And, I'm like on Twitter at like 1 a.m, and Twitter in the trending topics is like audio tapes, Melania Trump talking about family separation and how she's like, oh, why are we being held accountable for this shit? It's bullshit that y'all are upset that we're doing this. And I was like, yo, I need the tea. CNN just broke some audio tapes. I'm like, honey, we gotta turn on the TV. I gotta watch some CNN real quick. I know it's late. She's like, yeah, sure, why not? I turn on CNN, and all we're talking about is breaking news. Middle of the night, President Trump tests positive for COVID. And I was like, oh, well, that's breaking news. But I'm over here still being like, yo, what happened to these audio leaks? Like, can I get this information? Because it seems pertinent to a situation that is still ongoing, right? Let's not forget that maybe like 3 weeks ago, we were talking about personal testimony from a doctor who said that hysterectomies are being forced onto women at the border, right? Like, again, we're not talking about it.
Where was their black square?
It went away almost immediately as soon as it popped up because other shit came up.
Right.
And so, like, all the heat and all the intensity about, like, we should be advocating for justice for the situation is just ghost. Right? And I feel like the same thing has happened to Breonna. Like, she has also gotten ghosted by the fact that, if anything, the GOP just, like, has so much fuck shit going on constantly that it is difficult to get every sheep that exists in this fucking country to focus. Our attention spans are already short enough.
Yep.
And every time something pops off, people can't bring it back to the important part of the conversation to be like, oh, by the way, we were talking about this. We haven't settled this yet. Let's bring it back around and work through this, and maybe we can get to the other thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's crazy to me. And so the thing about this GOP COVID stuff, you know, my kids have been talking about it. I'm sure your kids have been talking about it too. You know, I had those kids who were like, yes, he got fucking sick. And then I had the other kids who were like, you know, I don't wish death on anybody. Like, it's pretty shitty. I hope he, like, you know, turns his ass around when you know, if he pulls through this and whatever. And
which is the tea of literally like the last 2 hours.
Right. Yeah. Oh,
dickhead shows up, no mask on, pulls up to the crib, wants to do a promo.
I mean, seriously, like right before I sat down to boot up my computer, this asshole is leaving the hospital, gets to the White House, and does a photo op with no mask on. I'm like, you have got... Never mind the fact that, like, my brain exploded when he did his little victory lap around the hospital in a hermetically sealed fucking vehicle.
Last night?
Because I'm like, bro, do you... Like, clearly you didn't know what the definition of hermetically sealed meant. So you didn't understand that you turned the inside of that vehicle into a petri dish. Ace, I noticed that too. I said that exact same shit to Lo. I was like, that man is not breathing well on his own.
Negative. And you know, you know who I feel for? And it's funny, right? Because we talk about like Blue Lives Matter. Nobody's talking about the Secret Service agents who had to drive his crusty Cheeto ass around in that sealed car on the whim of a fucking narcissist. Not for nothing, I don't know how Bull doesn't look at his homie in the passenger like, we about to Praetorian Guard this motherfucker, right? Like we're about to put him out right here. I can't, you know, and in a moment where people feel like impelled to offer well wishes to Donald Trump because he contracted this deadly disease, within 48 hours of his hospitalization, he willfully exposes two individuals for the sake of a fucking photo op is disgusting to me.
Yeah, and
just when I thought there were no new lows, like this was it. We got to rock bottom, and we were just gonna like coast down here to November. No,
he willfully endangered their health and safety, and he didn't even follow government protocol. Like all White House correspondents were like, by the way, we weren't told that he was gonna leave. We're supposed to go where he goes because there needs to be news media present in case of any sort of event. That is like standard protocol, and he just dipped out without following any of the protocol. And then, not to mention the other issues with like the lack of accurate reporting that we're receiving from the doctors that are in charge of his care. I actually found out that the gamer doc, who I follow on Twitter, who's a phenomenal human being, used to work at Walter Reed for a few months, and she's been on a trip on Twitter about like, this is not how doctors do things. Let me just be very clear with you. Like, this is not how we operate. We're not supposed to do any of these things that are going down. And just the sheer volume of sketch that is being used to paint this situation as anything close to normal is absurd, right? And this asshole also had the audacity to come out here after his little stint and be like, you know, America, don't be afraid. COVID, it's not that bad. Motherfucker, like, we don't all have health care. Not to mention, we don't all have good health care. Right? You may have it, but it may be ass. You may still have aggressive copays. You don't have access to the world's greatest antiviral cocktail, right? Like... Yep.
And you know what else got buried in all this? The shit about his fucking taxes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And it's funny. So when I was recording We Can't Breathe last night, I'm sitting there. Let me because I keep my We Can't Breathe and office hours notes together. So I'm making a list right here, right? I'm like, all right, these are the three like intro pieces because I've been gone for a week since I was working, and then on the other side, I had to write in taxes because I forgot about that shit. I forgot about the fucking tax bullshit.
I forgot about it too.
And I bring up the taxes, to complement the point that you're making about like where the leads are getting buried. but to also like, I think I'm increasingly convinced that Trump's entire 2016 campaign and his unprecedented ascent to the highest seat in this country is entirely about him being able to meet this looming monstrous debt that is coming to fucking roost.
Oh yeah.
And so to me, like, shameless self-promotion, this is one of the reasons why I'm just not convinced that Trump is a white nationalist. Is Trump a fucking racist? Yes. But Trump is far too self-serving to be a bona fide white nationalist. And I think when I look at this whole, when I look at like the Rose Garden confirmation or nomination rather, that's increasingly being called a super spreader event, like the Sturgis bike rally in the Dakotas, whichever one it was. I can't help but like the fucking hubris of like how bold, how out of touch with the fucking rest of the country. But I don't know how you don't see this and see modern Trump branded conservatism as a suicidal enterprise. It is a death march. It is a death march. And what I mean by that is that this is a party. This is a party steeped in the necropolitical. That is so self-serving, so self-aggrandizing, so fixated on looting the country, that it will set us all on a fucking death march so long as it lines the pockets of the few. That Trump could the COVID numbers are already fucking heinous, right?
Yep.
209,000. And moments after he has been infected with this virus and has been released under the shystiest of circumstances, that other members, not members of the medical establishment, not tied to his campaign, or who aren't like Trump zealots or acolytes, are saying this is all suspicious, that he can so carelessly return to the people's house to expose other people to death because it is advantageous to him, and only to him, speaks volumes about the state of the fucking GOP today. That moment for me is emblematic of where, for sure where we are as a country, but where the GOP is right now. The GOP is on a fucking death march. It's on a death march. And Herbie, you've known me for a long time. I'm not a scared person. I'm not a fearful person. But I am deeply concerned about what lies ahead on an election that's already fixing to be incredibly contested.
I mean, okay, so then this then lets me get to the thing that has been bothering me the most.
Speak on it.
And I put it in our notes for today. I pulled excerpts from my students' journals. Now, it's all redacted. There's no personal identifiers in here of any flavor, because I want to protect them as well as myself. But essentially, what I have them do every week is I have them contribute these informal written journals for them to just talk to me about where they are, how they're feeling, and what's going on, right? Like, sometimes it's related to course material, sometimes it's related to their lives, sometimes it's a mix of both. It runs the gamut of a whole bunch of different things. And I was doing some grading for their journal entries for last week. They do on Fridays, and a handful of them reference the debate. And I told them, I was like, listen, we are in the middle of a module. We don't have time to talk about it right now, but we're going to talk about it when we get to that part. And I decided as of today that I'm going to reorganize my syllabus so that we start the government and politics section this coming week instead of starting race. As much as I want to talk about race, reading this shit, I feel like I have a civic duty to talk about government and politics so that they understand what the fuck is going on. Because, you know, and again, in the same vein that you just spoke on, Reece, like, you've known me a very long time. I'm not a scared person, but I am worried about my kids. I'm worried about my job as an educator. I'm worried about my capacity as an academic. I don't actually know what to do. I don't know what to do, and it's driving me fucking insane. And I honestly wish that I could have, like, petitioned every academic that we know that's teaching right now and forced them to be here, to have a fucking brain trust. Because I stepped out of this office area like 3-4 times this afternoon in the span of 20 minutes to just vent to my spouse about this, because I don't know what to do. I'm at this crossroads where I read this stuff from my students, and I'll read a handful of highlighted sections from this, and I can't figure out what is the correct approach to convey both my level of concern and what I believe to be objectively the best approach. Because I feel like I've gotten to a point where objective isn't something I'm capable of. And this is one of those arenas. I feel like politics has always been this space that is difficult to navigate. As a gender scholar, there's no punches pulled. We're in the middle of the gender module right now, and I come at my kids full force like, listen, don't even come anywhere near me with any heteronormative masculine bullshit. I have no patience for it. I have no time for it. This is where I stand on this issue. This issue has been debated for centuries in this country. This is where we're at with it right now, and this is how I feel. I pull zero punches on that topic. Race was like that. Certainly over the span that I've been a graduate student and been in charge of teaching, I feel like the situation at hand has allowed for me to be a lot more verbose about what reality is and what I feel my opinions are, to be like, listen, we live in a racist society, and there's no sugarcoating that. I have gotten comfortable saying that to my students. 3 years ago, not a chance in hell. I specifically remember when I was doing teacher training, race was the week in Intro to Soc that the least amount of time was spent on, and it was very, very glossy. Because it was a hot button issue. It's still a hot button issue, but in an entirely different light, right? Like now, people are expected to come to the classroom with some flavor of opinion, right? As long as it's rooted in academic fact and what have you. And even still, you get students who contest your opinion and will say, well, I don't necessarily agree with whatever you're presenting with me, despite the fact that you have data upon data upon data to make bricks with clay, right? Like,
can't even argue with this.
But politics remains this, like, alabaster city on the hill that you got to be really careful about, right? And the alabaster comment is intentional. Like, you know, I feel like I'm still tiptoeing on glass around the problem to be like, can I actually say what I feel? Right. And what I need you to understand about what's going on, right? So, take this student who says, I'm not much of a political person, and I'm usually out of the loop about that kind of stuff, but that is the exact reason why I make it my responsibility to watch the presidential debates in order to hear both sides with an open mind and decide which candidate I would like to vote in support of. My main takeaway from this madness, I believe democracy itself is in truly grave danger. I have no clue who to vote for, nor do I know either side's standpoint on important topics such as COVID-19 plans, and I just hope and pray that the next debate is run much more smoothly and efficient for viewers like me who rely on these debates to formulate our opinions on voting. May God help us all. Right? Like, so you remember our conversation when the debate was coming up. We were talking to Aries, and Aries was like, why do y'all watch it? I'm curious genuinely about why you watch the debates. And I said very plainly, undecided voters watch the debates to make decisions. And I need to know what they're hearing to understand what they're basing their logic on. To which, you know, I think he countered with, well, I can't believe we still have undecided voters. I'm like, well, of course we do. I can't believe that we have them either, but I know that they exist. And now I increasingly understand that I have a very large handful of them in my classroom. And I struggle to not just scream at them and say, like, how the fuck can you be undecided? Are you not paying attention?
Yep.
Because at this point, to me, to be undecided, and again, this may be just me being too subjective about the entire thing, but like to be undecided at this point is to be completely apathetic. Like, you have washed your hands of literal logical humanity and are incapable of making a decision. So you've chosen not to. And will only make one in the final hour.
Right.
Which, like, I guess the question I want to ask you is, like, is this something you struggle with? Like, do you not have this same internal battle? Like, are you not just dying to scream at some kids and be like, the fuck is wrong with you?
So I think there are a couple of pieces that make our jobs different. One is that one of the hardest parts about transitioning into this work, coming off of university teaching, was that a freshman in college is dumb. A senior in college is less dumb, but they are like developmentally the same, right? A freshman in high school lives in a galaxy apart from a senior in high school. And so like the levels of engagement are different with, and they only catch me in those 2 points, right? I teach a 9th grade, like a survey course. And then I teach the area studies courses, African-American, Latinx, Asian American studies. And so my juniors and seniors are ready to have like some higher level conversations. My 9th graders are so far behind because they have, right? Think about a 14-year-old kid. If they have any memory of a president, it's if they paid attention to politics at all, it's one of 2 people, Obama and Trump. Right? That's it.
Mm-hmm.
At least in terms of like waking memory. And so, you know, I remember having like a kid brought up in class who were like, Teacher Reece, are all political debates like this? And I realized like how much work still needed to be done with young people who aren't voters yet, and yet will be voters, right? Like I need to prepare them because in 4 years they're going to be the stewards of this next election, right? Of the what's the next? So 24.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like heartbreaking that these kids are coming into political consciousness, and their concept of what robust political debate is circus.
Yeah.
It's blunder and circus. So that's their concept of political engagement. That's how we vie for the highest office of the land. What are we priming those young people to expect 4 years from now when they are eligible to vote? You know, my U.S. kids, obviously. And then with my upper level kids, my 11s and my 12s, by and large, they're in a different place, man. There is no apathy. Like these kids are pretty cemented. There is a palpable sense that this election really matters, that those of them who are eligible to vote should vote, that there is an existential crisis afoot, which will be did you see Streamlabs talking shit to Cassie?
Don't be a dick. God
What?
damn it.
Hold on, but I want to fuck Streamlabs, but I want to read what Cassie wrote. I think there's definitely some level of understanding when it comes to kids who are going through that political weight for the first time. I think if kids are looking at politics or not with their parents, it can be, for sure, right? Absolutely. And I think that
you're allowed to say as much as you want.
Speak on it, Cassie. These kids are you know, my young ones are overwhelmed for sure. There's very much a sense of like, this is huge and it's important. I think my big worry, and I teach at a Quaker institution, so it's like, it's not challenging is maybe the wrong word. but there's some pedagogical and spiritual pieces that make this challenging.
Mm-hmm.
But like, when I think about like those worst case existential apocalyptic scenarios, like I don't know that we can survive 4 more years of this.
I
I
don't
don't
think
think that we as a country can sustain 4 more years of this, especially given that we have a fucking global pandemic, that we have. I mean, the laundry list is so deep that I would waste our time speaking every point of it.
Yeah.
And I ask myself, at what point do we take to the streets? At what point, right? Like the Proud Boys have this like fantasy, this like this they LARP at this like pending civil war, but I think that like in so many ways we are at that juncture. And what's going to be the call? What's the moral impetus, right? At what point do we shoot back? And I don't say that to beat my chest. I don't say that from a place of like, I don't trust our democratic process, and if it doesn't go the way I want it to go, I'm gonna, go on a rampage. That's not what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think the stakes are higher than just saying, well, my party lost, so I just gotta like take it on the chin and move on.
Right.
And I don't know how to impart that urgency. I don't even know if it's like appropriate to impart upon my students that sense of urgency of like, this is a critical crossroads. We have never been at a place like this in my lifetime, in the lifetime of anybody alive right now. And so my worry is that like, it's, oh, President Trump sucks, we should get him out. But I don't know that there's an appreciation of just what's at stake right now.
No, yeah, I think you're speaking exactly to the problem that I'm having of getting them to understand the urgency of like, you need to be, if you can vote, you need to vote early, you need to vote immediately, but you need to vote with knowledge and understanding of what the situation is and what the situation is going to be. Again, another point of struggle for me, should you make the wrong decision, which is like the thing that I feel like as an academic I'm not allowed to do. I'm not allowed to judge them and be like, yo, you're fucking wrong. And if you can't see that, I need to figure out how to get you to figure it out on your own. It's like I have to trick them. Like I have to fucking inception their brain, right? To be like, you want to vote for Biden, not because you like him, but because we need to move the fuck on, right? Like, that is like a mental like jujitsu that's really difficult to do without just being heavy-handed and being like, yo, wake the fuck up. Like, please right. Wake up and pay attention.
Right. And I think like particularly, I think there are a couple of things happening in the university in particular. I think universities are, right, the increasing accusation is that these are like liberal bastions, like devoid of any free. I mean, you pick up any Heather McDonald book, and that's literally the argument she's making, that our universities are really just brainwashing machines of the left, and that they don't offer any genuine diversity of ideas. That's the only diversity that like conservatives seem to care about. And really, it's just like, let me air out my misogyny, ethno-nationalism, and vapid racism, and have it like earn some legitimacy by getting airtime in a university. So like I think there's that like patently anti-intellectual accusation that circulates around colleges and university, and right, and in every single one of my reviews at SU, every single one, there was at least one kid who was like, Professor Porras is a Marxist insurrectionist who insists that we think the way that he thinks. And it's not true. Like, and in fact, I tell my kids all the time, ask any one of my kids, what don't I care about? And they will tell you, I don't care about what I think. You care about what I prove. And I think that's where these fucking like conservatives get so like riled up, is it like they want to be afforded some kind of credence without any evidence. But what's also happened is that universities have abdicated any kind of public responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cohort of scholars saying this bullshit has to end the day before yesterday. And we're the intelligentsia taking a stance saying this is wrong and here's why. No, we're content to publish our fucking bullshit in the circle jerk of publishing, writing to love letters to each other, abdicating any public responsibility as like literally like professional book readers.
Yep.
And then what do we care about? Bringing back fucking football.
Eek. Yeah, that comment was next level bullshit, dude.
That's where the university is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And there we I don't think we've ever had a robust tradition of public intellection in this country. And we have long given up the idea that that's like a good, that that's a public good, that even if you work at a private university, that's part of your job is engaging in public intellection and elevating public discourse so that we have a citizenry that makes good decisions, that makes informed decisions, even if they're ones that we disagree with. I don't know of scholars that are doing this.
I think you're right.
And granted,
I don't think there are any. I couldn't name one if I tried, honestly.
Couldn't tell you. Right? I mean, maybe some folks are taking to Twitter, but is there some concerted scholarly challenge to the Trump regime right now?
Yeah, no. And I mean, and it's not concerted, right? But I think about, you know, my own work as moderator of a anti-black racism course, and I'm like, well, that's the right approach, but it's not like a unified front. You know what I mean? And you know, even today I was fielding emails, and I had someone who was like, you know, I was reminding them, and it's a staff person, so that, you know, they're not getting a grade for the course, and they essentially were like, you know, I had sent out a reminder emails. Anybody who didn't have a grade for the quizzes, like, reminder, submit the quizzes when you get a chance. You know, we can reopen them for you if you need them to be reopened. Mostly to, like, get the grad students on board and be like, yo, you want your credits, like, please pay attention. And this person was like, oh, you know, I don't know how to access them, and so I, like, very detailed elaboration on how to access this stuff. And they were like, oh, I thought this was, like, a self-reflective process and that I wasn't going to be, like, held accountable for grading. And I'm like, well, you're not. You're a staff person. And the person was like, oh, please withdraw me from the course. And I'm like, if you want to be withdrawn, this is the channel you go through. However, like, remember that you're not going to be graded. You can choose to engage in this at your own, you know, at your own accord. Like, whatever you feel like doing for this, like, you're not getting graded. So you can do it should you want to, like, elevate your consciousness about these issues. And I guess, like, it can't be seen as a concerted effort, even on the university's part, because it's not mandatory for faculty and staff. Probably should be, right? And it should probably also be pretty overt in being like, by the way, we're not just talking about the history of anti-black racism, but we're also going to talk about the fact that this has very direct correlations to our current experience and flies in the face of what you're being told by the current administration, right? So if the fabric of your university isn't willing to do that, and then academics across the board aren't going to do it either, it certainly makes you feel like the odd person out when you're the lowly graduate student who's like, I have a duty to my own fucking sanity to be the one to say, hey, let me explain to you with data why our election process is terrible, why the Electoral College makes no sense, why voter suppression and poll watching is going to be a fucking problem in a month, why this is the twilight of democracy and authoritarianism is literally smiling at us from across the table right now.
It's literally on my desk right now. Henry Giroux's
Right?
American Nightmare, facing the
with,
challenge of
with
fascism.
pure unadulterated fact to convey this information in the hopes that without me saying, you know, I need you to care about what I think, right, that they will come to this conclusion on their own. Because I've got kids who've told me, you know, That is a pretty scary book cover, I gotta admit. I have kids who told me, like this is gonna be their second time voting, and the first time they followed like the family line. They just towed the family line. They were like, I've never critically thought about politics, and so like I just did what I thought my family told me was correct. And I've gotten to a point now where they're like, I don't really fully agree with them anymore, and in fact, I'm pretty confused about where I stand given what they're arguing for. And then I've got students who in another one of these excerpts here is like this student. I can kind of tell, and I never want to assume because I don't know their personal backstories. I know very little about them personally. Short of us being in the classroom, I can't really like learn who they are, which kind of sucks. So I know like their names and their majors, which isn't a lot to go on. And this student says, I understand that Trump has had a tough year with COVID, Black Lives Matter, and just a general dislike for his party administration, which is, I think, being very generous. But he has to come to grips with the fact that this isn't 2016. Which to me then sounds like this is a person whose family or themselves and their family voted for him in 2016 because they're like, that was then, we were on board then.
Right.
This is different, and we're not on board anymore. Right. But this person also then goes on to say that the Democrats, want the economy to stay closed forever, or as long as possible. And that we can't spend a bunch of money building, energy initiatives when families can't put food on the table. And I'm sitting here like, all right, so then how am I gonna, like, what level of data is it? Yeah, what level of data is it going to take to explain to you that there is a correlation between clean, efficient living and quality of life? You will have to spend less on other things that are such a focal point of your current existence if our planet isn't on fire and experiencing hurricanes every 2 weeks on the other side of the country, and that our minimum wage is infinitely higher, right? And that we're not dependent on fossil fuel. Like the whole, like, it's difficult to help, like, to paint that trajectory for them, right? To be like, yo, can you follow the dots to see how this is connected to this other thing? But you're looking at them as two separate issues that cannot coexist, right? Like, if you have a clean and efficient economy, you can pay less money for shit. Or you can pay for shit because you have more money than you need for those things because we're not fucking all broke, right? Like, what was it? Switzerland just passed a $25 minimum wage or some shit? Forget which country it was. $25 minimum wage. Could you imagine? My bitch ass worked for $12 an hour at Forever 21. And I thought I was big balling. I thought I was big balling. $25 an hour? I'm sitting here like
splitting tips and bars, bro. Like, this shit sucks.
Like, how can we not fathom that these things are connected?
Yeah.
And that to place too much emphasis on one issue is to overshadow, like, the long process, right? And I feel like this is what I'm hearing from a lot of these students who are complaining about the debate and how it went and the lack of information that they got. I'm like, well, on the one hand, you didn't get any information because, let's be real, Trump spoke at every possible moment of the fucking debate, right? Which means that you can't hear any information because he's just rambling on and on. It's not going to happen.
He doesn't say anything.
Right? The other problem with it, right, is that at no point in our political process do candidates make a concerted effort, really and truly, to explain policy. One of the reasons I am infatuated with AOC is because, like, she takes her time to go on Twitter and be like, let me explain to you things in layman's terms. It's really quite simple, right? Even the other day when she was referencing some legal policy, she's like, by the way, we intentionally wrote it so you didn't need a law degree to read it. Here you go. You can read it. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Look at that. Mm-hmm. But that's not an approach that we have. And I also, like, I feel like as we don't have enough time to do that, right? Like, this is an intro to social class that I'm teaching. I don't have a year to convey this information. I got to jump around. I got to teach them how to write as, like, the cornerstone of this experience. There's only so much time to focus on these issues, right? And like you mentioned, I don't want to be coming across as, like, this crazy Marxist lunatic who's just like, yo, we got to burn it down. Like, it's time for the proletariat uprising. I mean, it is, but, like, I get so frustrated. And then the one that really just the one that really set me off, like really truly, is the last one that I put on the notes, where this student basically is like, I wanted to talk about the election process and the debate. I wrote all this stuff, the page refreshed, and I lost what I wrote, so I'm rewriting it now. So like literally narrating the process as they're writing the journal entry. And
I hate when kids do that. Can I just say that?
I hate
that
it too.
That drives me banana sandwich.
I hate it, but I appreciated that they were like, listen, like I was doing it, I wrote all this shit, and then like I paused for just long enough for it to reset, and it was all gone. Which Blackboard sucks. If you don't look at Blackboard for I think like 5 minutes straight, and you try to type the whole shit, yeah, it's awful, right? And so they were like, I'm so frustrated with the fact that somehow out of all the people who live in this country, many of which are brilliant, I'm sure we always end up in a situation where we're forced to pick the lesser of two evils when considering the leadership in this country. Trump has failed over and over to prove that he's a good leader in this country, and they say a bit more about where they stand on the issue. And then the part that set me on fire was at the end of the entry, they go, I'm really sorry. I'm at my boyfriend's house, and as I write this right now, he looked over my shoulder at what I was writing about Trump. We started talking about the debate and ended up in a big fight. And I don't have the energy to continue what I was writing. And then it ends. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Like, I'm not a therapist. No. I can't manage those kinds of situations. Yeah. And I appreciate the honesty. But like, I don't like, is there a correct response in that situation? Like, the fuck am I supposed to do? In my mind, right, like, I think the hood rat part of me is like, that man is cap. Like, everything about that man is cap. But I can't say that, right? Like, that's inappropriate, right? And it crosses a line, I think, in many ways, but one of the ways in which it crosses it is just like, I can't be imparting views on these children. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just trying to figure out going forward, like, what's the right approach? What do I say? How do I prove to them that, like, there's a right and wrong way to go about this, that despite the fact that our institution and our society can't seem to, like, provide you with usable information and knowledge, that there are steps that you could take in order to figure this out, both on your own and through a channel like this course. And, to go back to what we were mentioning earlier, right? Like, to not let all the leads get buried. Because every time some new drama pops up, we stop paying attention. We stop paying attention about the taxes, and the only time I heard it mentioned in the last week is when people were like, by the way, this man just paid the equivalent of $21,000 in insurance expenses, at the behest of the government, despite the fact he doesn't pay taxes. And if the standard citizen were to need the same amount of emergency care, they'd have to take a loan out just for the $1,000 it costs to take the fucking ambulance to the hospital. And I'm like, we can't forget then that this, like, that's, but everyone forgot. No one's talking about that. No one. Yeah. And even myself, again, like we mentioned, I lost sight of that until I was reminded of it earlier today. And I was like, I gotta pay better attention. I gotta be fucking writing on the other margins of pages, like, don't forget taxes, audio tapes, right? Like, all these things. It feels overwhelming, and at the same time, I feel like I'm not doing enough.
Yeah, and I think it's hard not to feel that way when the enormity of the issues is what it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, you make me think about a litany of things that as I think about, like, how do we equip young people or our students, even if they're non-traditional kids.
Not just young people. I mean, like, let's be real.
Right. That's
there
what I'm saying.
There are a lot of folks that we run into that gotta figure this shit out.
Oh yeah, 100%. Don't even get me started. There's some people real close to me that maybe should be listening to this. But I'll leave it at that. I think, you bring up this piece about, like, well, I'm not a therapist. I think that we've created this, like, confluence of, like, politics and therapy that, like, to me feels really insidious, which is not to be disparaging of mental health. I want to be very clear, right? But I'm not a fucking clinician. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not a clinician, and I feel like every political issue right now is about trauma. The trauma of, the trauma of, the trauma of. You have to deal with it. Like, I recently got invited to this, like, educators of color, like, affinity space. And it's like, we're here to talk about our racial trauma. And I'm like, I am not traumatized. None of you are clinicians. I'm not consenting to be in any kind of therapeutic fucking relationship with any of you people. But that's like what passes as politics. And so I say it to say this. I think we have students that are like increasingly committed to this, like, and again, I before I even make my next comment, I want to be clear that in my statement here, I'm parsing out the deployment of trauma as like a catchword, separate from like mental health interventions and therapeutic modalities that are functionally necessary for like optimal well-being. Right. I want to be very clear for anybody who's listening now or folks who might watch later. I'm like separating those two things because I think we have popularized and turned trauma into this kind of like social justice trope that's increasingly devoid of meaning.
Let me jump in really quickly just to co-sign that statement. Whether or not you understand what it means or agree with it, we are all, as a society, very much obsessed with trauma porn. We fucking love it. Trauma is pornography of the fucking nth degree. It is like the purest grade heroin that you could possibly consume right now for the American populace.
Yeah, 100%.
Everyone fucking 100%. Loves it. And so I think you're totally right that it has that sort of very 100%. Dangerous, like, narcotic relationship with us right now. Continue.
Oh, yeah. And there's so many layers. I'll never forget what your cousin wrote, what Jasmine wrote about Black at Taft. And she was like, listen, like, I walked away from Taft and I had my demons, but that, I was Gucci. To then have Black at Taft pop up and like have all of that spit back at me, I was not ready for that. And I got to be honest, as I look at a lot of as I look at just how like right, how trendy like the Black Hat pages were and how much they've it was a precipitous like finding out. I think it's precisely because we were caught up in the tea, right? We mistook virality for changing consciousness. They are not the same thing. And we fucking mainlined it all summer long. I don't care what campus you were at. Mm-hmm. We were obsessed. And so now I think we're in a place where like every political issue has this like veneer of like mental health and trauma and all this other shit that like is at odds with actual like robust like mental health interventions, right? And actual like anyway. So I say that to say this, that like I think we've got a cohort of students, and you're right that we're talking about like people who live in this country. I say students here because those are the populations that we have the most intimate contact with. Their work is so like we ask everybody to write self-reflection, and so they become convinced that like political work, that caring about race or gender or capitalism or whatever is comes down to navel gazing. And so like I mean, how many times have you read a paper that starts with I feel?
Oh yeah.
I don't give a fuck how you feel.
Yep. I tell them that explicitly. That's in the directions. Like, do not ever say I feel.
Right, and so we've become caught up in like this is our approach, right? This is our approach to politics. We're not like even equipping our students to engage in any robust way. And and then you take AOC for example, right? Like we in the era of Trump, who's pulled the spectrum so far right, somebody like AOC is like off the charts leftist, right? So to even like you can't even traffic in her ideas, you can't bring her up without being outright dismissed as a radical leftist, mm-hmm. right? It becomes impossible, even though I think AOC's ideas are phenomenal and actually harken back to a prior era of American politics. Like AOC is actually not proposing anything that's wild.
Nope. But she's been labeled a socialist, and that's not going to change.
Right, and no, not at all. And then, from my vantage point as somebody who's primarily a high school teacher, I think about like our high school history class. Is it perfect? Is it flawless? No, by no means, right? But it is a course about American inequities from the colonial period into the contemporary moment. And when I think about like all of the protest movements that happened on campuses in 2014 on the heels of Mike Brown and Freddie Gray and um, Eric Garner, one of the unifying pieces, like callings, was a curriculum that's taught that a requisite course that teaches people about the catalog of American inequities so that we might then understand the history of the present. And when I was watching that, I was like, shit, my high school does that. Right? So imagine if we made that, like a course like that, a requisite component of university education. What if we made a course like that a requisite component of high school education? What kind of like long-standing change might that make? Will it pass? No. Like Texas won't let that shit happen, right? But let a man dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that there's so many things that we need to that like put us behind the eight ball. Like the issues feel enormous, and then the tools that we've given people are shitty. The discourse is unaccommodating. The soil is fallow, and so it feels daunting, Mothman. It feels daunting in a moment where the stakes could not be fucking higher.
Okay.
Like this, like being a frontline worker.
Yeah.
Name the laughter? What's the laughter?
No, I'm just like it spoke to just this like internal strife that I'm feeling. I was just like, yeah, no, that's it. That's how I feel.
That's it.
You can only I can only help but laugh because I'm just like, well, I'm fucked.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly,
mm-hmm.
I don't know.
And it feels like this bizarre double bind, right? Because I think a lot of educators increasingly find themselves as like frontline workers, right? In a way that is so at odds with like the tenor of conversations in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
And so our work feels dangerous and precarious, and like, this isn't to like shit on my employer, but nobody here's contracted. We're all at will employees, right? So, like that feels really precarious, right? I don't know how else to put it, and then I'm trying to educate in the midst of COVID, and I'm trying to educate in the midst of COVID while we have a presidency unlike any fucking other. And let's see what my average is at for sleep. I'm gonna open this up. I'm telling you right now, this number's gonna be disgusting. You ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
2 hours and 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's probably not good.
That's what I'm averaging.
Yeah, I don't.
That doesn't include my weekends. That doesn't include my weekends. That doesn't include Saturday and Sunday. I slept in real good Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, but I mean, that doesn't really account for everything else.
But I think that's what it's like to teach right now, dude. Like, and I know I don't need to tell you that shit, but like, and part of me feels like I need to be like self-preserving in some, right? It's not like not going to the door. I need to find those moments, right? Those small victories where I say like, I need to commit myself to something else.
Yep.
But it also feels like, coño, these fucking issues aren't going away.
They're not gonna.
And so like, like if I need to have 3 hours with the office hours because my kids are thinking through like what the fuck is happening, then damn it, I'm gonna have 3 hours with the office hours.
Right. And honestly, like as time consuming as it is for you, I feel like that's a boon. I would only hope that my kids would actually take me up on office hours at any point and be like, yo, you know what? Like today's not the day. I need to talk about stuff. I need to use this space to work through these thoughts, feelings, ideas that I have, right? To make sense of the absurdity. One of the things that I relished when I was teaching a first year seminar was that with freshmen, they were like, we'd have 15 minutes, give or take, at the beginning of every class to be like, the fuck is going on in the world? You're new here, adjusting to, college life is hard. Shit is happening in the world, shit is happening in your own life. Like, let's just shoot the breeze for a little bit. And sometimes that would take 30, 45 minutes because there would just be so much stuff going on. They'd just be like, you know what, we're going to have to talk. And I'm like, well, fuck.
Right.
Like, now I have only a limited amount of time to teach. And they would be the same ones who, with them, I give them my phone number and my email. And they were like, fuck email. You're about to get texted all the time. And they would just hit me up about stuff. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is what it's like. I'm just going to field text constantly about things.
Bro, philosophy, the Philly Puge account right now is just screen caps of my kids hitting me up at crazy hours talking about, yo, Teacher Reece, this is bonkers. And, and like, for example, at work, we've got a new schedule and I love it. It's brilliant. But we're also teaching in the time of COVID to kids in every time zone. Mm-hmm. And so there are things that for equity, we got to do straight up. And I know that I've been dropping the ball as a teacher in meeting those obligations precisely because of that. Because kids come in and they're like, yo, we need to talk about Breonna Taylor. We need to talk about COVID. We need to talk about the election. And what am I going to do? Bust a breakout room?
Yeah.
Like, if education is meant to be transformative, if education is meant to speak to the real world, then coño, like, I'm in a place where I'm probably a week and a half behind in all my sections because those moments keep cropping up. These last 2 weeks have been, I mean, come on now.
Yep.
In the last 2 weeks, we had a failed indictment. We had a nut-ass debate. We had the fucking tax bullshit. Now Trump got the Rona, and now this dickhead's on the fucking balcony of the people's house killing other people. And now we got another 10,000 people dead from coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
what am I supposed to do?
I'm
pretend like my homework matters?
I'm 2 days behind, and I feel like it's just gonna get worse. Especially now that I'm gonna change up the schedule. Like it's going to get worse. I'm inevitably going to be behind.
Yep.
As I have to like adjust the schedule so that I can allow for these conversations to take place, because I think by and large, like, my kids think I don't read these things. Mm-hmm. Like that I don't read it, like that they're all their assignments are busy work, right? That are like, oh, we're learning from home, and like he's just assigning stuff so that he can keep tabs on us and make sure that we get a grade. No. Even if we were in class, I'd still be reading all this stuff. I read your discussion questions and I read your journal entries. And so, like, looking at this, I'm like, well, shit, I can't not take time out to talk, which means that I lose time trying to teach. Mm-hmm. But you can't have both.
Right. And I think, Martha, when I hear you elucidate that challenge, like speak to that challenge, I mean, anybody who's been in the classroom in the last year can I think, especially at the high school and collegiate level, like that's where we are. And I think that pressure to like, oh well now I got to change my schedule and all this other shit, and I got to hit my modules. I think the big question there is, what's the point of education in a time like this?
That is a big question.
And I gotta be honest, Mothman, don't nobody give a fuck about my papers, bro.
Yep.
Nobody, like, and what I like, my kids care about the papers, right? I had a whole gaggle of folks really committed to, they're doing a textual analysis of our own Black App page, and these have been incredibly thoughtful projects, and both incisive and critical, and thoughtful and care. I mean, they've been really a joy to read. But when November comes, what's the unit for November? We're still going to be doing Get Out. I'm supposed to play Get Out like it's cool, like it's whatever.
Mm-hmm.
What I think educators need to be asking ourselves, like, what adjustments do we make to prepare our kids to live in the world that's going to be ushered, the world that's going to be ushered forth in November.
Yep.
We're either going to get 4 more years of this nonsense, or we're going to be in a position to need to do repair work that feels in so many ways insurmountable. How do we prepare people for that? what is our obligation? Like, I feel like this is a fucking civic duty. This feels like how I contribute to my country.
And I'm reminded of, 4 years ago when, for all the problems that I had with that professor, like that the morning of the decision, that class that was meant to be a core sociological theory class was dedicated almost entirely to just leaving space to think through what the next 4 years were going to be, and to illuminate, very specifically how none of this was a surprise, which to me was really helpful. And I thought that I would have to do the same thing. In me thinking, I'm like, I appreciate that someone did that for me, and should that come to pass, this November, I feel like I'm also obligated that Wednesday or whatever day that ends up being the next day when it's decided, to talk through everything. Like, I'm 99% sure that the Wednesday after election day, I'm going to spend the whole day in class just like explaining how election results work and why one day isn't enough to, select a winner and all these other things.
And that's assuming we have like decent numbers.
Right. Like essentially spending the day just like.
A lot of people are projecting that. Go ahead.
No, you're right. They're projecting that, it's going to take weeks to count everything because of how fucked our post office system is and all those other things. Right. And so like I really might just, in my mind, I'm like already envisioning a day where like my class just spends the morning just watching fucking like 3 or 4 different news outlets. Right. And we're just like trying to make sense of all the information as it comes in, because inevitably, on election days, there's a lot of hype and people are like, so and so is leading, and it's like 1% reported. And it's like, well, don't fucking blow shit up over nothing and get people overhyped about stuff because they don't understand what you're saying.
Right.
And so that conversation needs to be had and space needs to be made for it. And like you said, like, fuck the work that I'm trying to get them to do if it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, right? If it does come to pass that, Joe is elected, explaining to them, listen, just because he got elected does not mean that we're going to fix everything in 4 years. We're leaving space open to lay the groundwork for the changes that we need to happen, and trying to get them to understand why that is what that is, right? Why there's none of this nonsense about, you get elected and you have 4 years to do a lot of work, right? Your work is predicated on what the situation was when you started. You don't just get to rewrite the book in those 4 years. And a lot of people, I feel like, especially kids, in high school and college, don't understand that that's how the presidency operates, right?
Yep.
Even something as simple as breaking down, Trump's big claims about all the court seats that he filled. It's like, well, like when you phrase it in the way that doesn't make sense to people who understand what the situation is, it sounds like you were gifted this opportunity, when in fact it was strategic. And unless you can explain that to people, right, they won't see it that way.
Yeah. And I think, Kirby, like, no matter where the election goes, I think we have a responsibility to not delude ourselves. Because I think when Trump won in 2016, we were like, how could this happen?
Right.
And I'm like, y'all motherfuckers are not paying attention.
Yep.
Y'all motherfuckers have not been paying attention. This is the bubbling dumpster fire that the GOP has been feeding dog turds to since the 50s. This is chickens coming home to roost. And at the same time, I'm also worried that if, I'm worried that we give Trump 4 more years and we're like, how did this happen? Like a bunch of dickheads.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also worried that it'll be like the Obama effect with Biden, but in reverse, right? That now that we've got Biden, that we're going to somehow enter this salubrious, like, anti-racist enlightenment, that all of the ethno-nationalist and white supremacist sentiments that Trump bubbled up are going to go away because Trump is gone.
Right. They're going to fucking like burrow underground for 4 years or some crazy shit, and we're just going to be like, wow, it's so much better.
Right. And I think, and this is what I said in We Can't Breathe last night. Like, Trump's relationship to white supremacists, and white nationalists in particular, is a strategic, politically expeditious relationship for both parties. Trump is not a white nationalist by any means. Do I think that he's like a white chauvinist? Absolutely. but Trump is not causal in that. Trump has activated a seedy, nasty element that has long been present in this country, and we need to reckon with why those groups have emerged, and not assume that once Trump is done that we've vanquished that threat. And I'm worried, Mothman. I'm really worried that we're gonna be dumbfounded if Trump wins, and then gonna fucking wave the flag of a newfound enlightenment should Biden win. Neither of those things, I think, is good for this country. We got a lot of work ahead of us.
Yeah, you fucking said it. I don't want to do any of it, but I know I have to.
But I know I have to.
I know I have to.